In early August of 2020, my wife and I were camping in the San Juan Mountains during a 10-day road trip around Colorado for our first anniversary. We specifically went to this location to hike the Ice Lake Trail, and I've sent along some screenshots from Google Maps to show you exactly where this happened. By some stroke of luck, we snagged one of the best dispersed camping spots I've ever gotten, and it was right on Mineral Creek. The road that goes back to the Ice Lake Trailhead is Forest Service Road 585, which mostly follows the creek. The campsite we found was just off this road, but the spot for tents was behind the brush and on the water with a perfect log for sitting and a rock fire ring. We stayed here for 2 nights. The first afternoon was perfectly normal, and after getting our camp set up, we ate dinner and sat by the fire, then went to bed early because we wanted to be at the trailhead and moving by 7 a.m. the next morning, and that's exactly what we did. We had a strenuous but great day hiking, and Ice Lake lived up to everything we had heard about it. By the time we got back to camp that afternoon, we were worn out and ready to do nothing for the rest of the night. We got another fire going when it got dark, made s'mores, then sat together by the log and listened to the creek. I don't know who noticed it first, but we saw something moving above us, and this is always hard for me to put into words because we couldn't tell what it was. We saw a dark object that looked like it was flying around at the top of the ridge next to us, but whatever it was blended into the sky so well that you could only catch it for a few seconds at a time. We would see it and try to follow it along the ridge, then lose it shortly afterward every time. I thought it had a translucence because it wasn't solid black, but it wasn't transparent either. It looked barely darker than the sky, so your eyes could pick it up. There just wasn't enough contrast to stay on it for too long. My wife thought it could have been a big piece of plastic or tent fabric blowing around way up there, but I think that's a stretch since there wasn't any wind to speak of, and it had to be so much bigger than a tent or a tarp. It also seemed to be moving intentionally, so I don't believe it was anything like that. This was like a little game we played for a good 10 minutes. Then one of the times when we lost sight of it, we never found it again. It was a weird thing to see, but we were tired and we didn't spend much time trying to solve the mystery before getting into the tent and going to sleep. It was really the next morning when the strangest part of this happened. We both slept in, so I'm not sure what time it was, but the sun was already coming down into the canyon and lighting up part of the hills around us. I got up and made coffee while my wife started getting herself ready in the tent. While I was waiting for her, I sat on the ground against the same log with my binoculars and started looking around the valley. All I wanted to do was check out the peaks and different slopes. Then I noticed something with my naked eye that caught my attention. I saw a thin gray line coming out of the trees way up on this steep green slope that the sun was hitting. When I lifted the binoculars back up, this gray line turned out to be a group of 5 people walking across an open gully between 2 sections of trees. They were walking right behind each other with only a couple of feet between them, and they weren't on any trail. They were just traversing this steep hillside. I couldn't believe these people were up there and really wondered what they were doing, so I slid down and put my head against the log so I could perfectly steady the binoculars and keep watching. The first thing I noticed was that all 5 of them were dressed exactly the same, and they seemed to be wearing skin-tight light gray outfits. They were a little too far away from me to see any fine detail, but it almost looked like they had on wetsuits or speed suits like an Olympic skier would wear. It really looked unnatural too, because they weren't spread out like hikers would be. They were walking in a perfect single file line right behind each other as they crossed this open slope. The longer I watched this, the weirder it looked. Another thing I noticed was that all 5 of them had very tall, lean builds, like long-distance runners or cyclists, and not one of them had a backpack on or any kind of gear that I could see. I kept tracking them with the binoculars as they crossed the opening and headed toward the trees on the other side, and when they got to them, something happened that I'll never forget. After the first 4 had gone straight into the trees, the last one in line stopped and quickly turned their head to the side to perfectly look in my direction. I know it seems like I wouldn't be able to tell from that far away, but I swear to God this person was looking directly at me. It felt like we had made total eye contact, and it made me pull the binoculars away from my face because I got that awkward feeling like I had gotten caught watching them. I can't explain this feeling, but somehow I knew that they knew I had seen them. It all happened very fast, and after a couple of seconds, the one in the back who had stopped turned toward the trees again and walked in. After that, this entire thing came to an end. From start to finish, seeing this group up on the hillside couldn't have lasted more than 3 or 4 minutes. My wife wasn't aware of anything because she had been in the tent, and it never crossed my mind to call her out because I was so focused on these people and what they were doing up there. I told her about it right afterward, but didn't really think about it again until we were on the road. We had a 3-hour drive that morning, so it gave me plenty of time to think about things, and the main part that bothered me was what we had seen flying around the top of that same ridge the night before. I still didn't know what it was, but what are the chances we would see something like that above the exact slope where those 5 strange people were the next morning? My wife thinks I'm connecting things that aren't related and says it could have been a search and rescue team practicing, or any number of other normal explanations. I understand why she thinks that, but she didn't see them like I did, and that is not what I saw. These 5 people, or whatever they were, had on skin-tight outfits with no visible equipment, so what comes to my mind is either a military exercise where some stealth government aircraft dropped these guys off and they were on the move in the morning, or it was something beyond explanation, and the object we saw that night came from a lot farther away than a military base. I'm sure that sounds crazy, so I don't expect everyone to agree with me on that. I don't think it would have hit me as hard if that last person in the line hadn't stopped and stared down the slope right at me. None of the other ones looked anywhere past where they were going, and it just seemed like such a deliberate stop and turn. It deeply felt like they knew I was watching. A few years ago, my wife Kate and our son Griffin and I saw and heard something incredible while camping in Wyoming. It was the first week of our son's summer vacation from school, and we were at Devil's Tower View Campground in our RV for 2 nights. This is a very small, family-owned campground with a cafe and incredible views of Devil's Tower, which was the main reason we had picked it. It was our first time there, and we wanted to be able to see it when we looked out of our windows in the RV. I even told Griffin in a very humorous way that he might see an alien ship fly over the top of it like the one in the Close Encounters movie. In hindsight, I can't believe I said that to him because we did experience something. The day we got there, we had shockingly good burgers for dinner at the cafe and an actual frosty mug of beer, which I still remember because no one does that anymore. Then on our second night, we made dinner in the RV and hung out under the awning together until well after dark. Around the same time, when everyone was feeling ready to go to sleep, Griffin jumped off of his chair and pointed out a shooting star. My wife and I had also seen it at about the same time, but it stayed visible for a lot longer than most shooting stars do, and we watched it go across a third of the sky. It still looked identical to every other one I've seen, with a bright yellow-orange color and a tail behind it, but then it did something that defied physics. It looked like it hit an invisible wall as it got low on the horizon, but then it started going back up. The best way to picture this is that it made an overall V shape in the sky. It completely changed direction, and it wasn't a gradual curve. It did it at a sharp angle. We watched this in total disbelief as it went back up into the sky until it either burned up in the atmosphere or got too small to see. It even kept its tail the whole time. I have heard so many people talk about seeing strange things in the sky, but I didn't quite understand how jarring it would be to actually see something like this. It made me start to second guess what I knew about meteorites, and I wondered if it was possible for them to skip across the atmosphere like a stone does on water. This didn't skip though. It really looked like it ran into something and bounced back up into space. I think we all got a hefty dose of adrenaline from it because my son was jumping around afterward, and I had a hard time getting to sleep that night. It was my first time ever seeing anything unexplainable, and I could not believe it had happened only a few miles away from Devil's Tower. When we did finally call it a night, Griffin was out in minutes up in the cab over bed, and we left the rear windows cracked around our bed because it was a nice night. Then we went to sleep. I must have only been asleep for a little over an hour when I was woken up by the sound of a distant horn. When I first opened my eyes, I thought it was a train coming through a mile or so away because it had that same echo to it. I really didn't think twice and shut my eyes again to go back to sleep, but about a minute later I heard it again and I was much more awake that time to listen to it. When I was a kid, I grew up near train tracks and we would always hear the horn a few times as they crossed our main road, but this sounded like a giant ship horn from some boat on the ocean, and it wasn't in bursts of 2 or 3, it was just one solid tone. It got me to sit up in bed and I slid the window all the way open to see if I could figure out where it was coming from. The campground was dead quiet and there was no traffic on the road in front of the resort. Then I heard it a third time and it was the clearest and loudest one yet. This was a deep, loud horn sound but with some distance, and I could have sworn it was coming from the sky itself. I know sound can travel in weird ways and go all over the place, but that's where it seemed to be coming from. It reminded me of hearing a commercial jet going by and trying to find it. You can't really tell which direction to look, but you know it's coming from above you. I was so curious about what was causing it that I got up and went out the door to stand on this little piece of astroturf we lay down at the bottom of our steps. Then right behind me, Kate came out because she heard me get up. While the two of us stood there together, we heard this sound again. It was just as clear as the previous one, except the walls of the RV weren't interfering anymore, so it sounded massive in the sky, like giant celestial horns, and at that point I was positive it was above us. All I can say is that I've never heard another sound like it. There were layers of tones too, like different pitches going at the same time. A musical chord with 3 or 4 notes might be a good description. Griffin never woke up during this and we didn't go in to get him, so he didn't get to experience any of it. We stayed out there for quite a while though, and when we finally did go back in, we left the windows around our bed wide open just in case. I had gotten to hear it 4 times in a row and Kate heard it once. Unfortunately, that was the end, and other than the occasional car going by, it was quiet for the rest of the night. I also made a mental note of the time when we got back into bed, and all of this had happened between about 1:20 and 1:50 a.m. In the morning, while we were packing things up, there was an older couple camped in a huge expensive Class A just 2 spots away from us. I saw the man outside with his dog, so I asked if he had heard anything. I ended up having a long conversation with him because, to my surprise, he knew exactly what I was talking about. He and his wife had also heard the same horn sound, and it had woken them and their little terrier up. They didn't see the shooting star like we had, but they definitely heard the sound, and neither one of us could even guess what it might have been. I'm glad I stopped to talk to him because in a way it was comforting, and it confirmed that we weren't the only ones who heard it. I have to think that if it was loud enough to wake us up inside of our campers, other people in the area had to have heard it too. We had to leave that day, but we will always remember that trip. There's a chance the shooting star and the sound we heard have nothing to do with each other, but I refuse to believe they both happened on the same night by coincidence. I think they were one and the same. I've also done some deeper research into meteorites, and as far as I can tell, nothing could cause a meteorite to change direction like that. I think it's so funny and so fitting that the only time I've ever seen, heard, or witnessed anything unexplainable, it just so happened to be around Devil's Tower. My family has always been into camping, and a lot of my very best memories take place at campgrounds. My parents have been in love with national and state parks as long as I can remember, and even when we didn't have time for a bigger road trip, they would still find somewhere within an hour or 2 of our house to get away for the weekend. In the summer of 2022, we did exactly that and camped at Salt Fork State Park, 2 hours southeast of where we live in Mansfield. This campground is huge, with loop after loop of sites for tents and RVs. It was pretty busy while we were there because there was a large Mennonite group near us, but our site was tucked into a little section of tent-only sites right along the trees, and it ended up being a great location. After breakfast on our first morning, my mom and dad took my brother and me to hike the Hosak's cave trail. It's maybe a half-mile to the cave, so it was a quick outing, but this short trip gave me weird feelings before we had even set foot on the trail. Right when we got there, we saw an angel statue and a memorial for a 14-year-old girl who fell from the top of the cave and died back in 2003. Then there were all of these little things sitting around it like small glass flowers and other keepsakes, and it made me not want to be there. I felt awful for her family, but at the same time it made me anxious, and I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a series of strange things that happened during our hike. We had only been walking for a few minutes when my brother stopped us and said he had seen something in the trees. He couldn't explain what it was beyond describing it as a shiny bird taking off out of the corner of his eye, but he was positive he saw it and he kept talking about it on our way to the cave. Very shortly after that, we started hearing these really strange whooshing sounds in the trees. I don't know what else to call them since I can't compare it to anything. I suppose it was like large birds taking off, but without the flapping. It did have kind of a wind sound though. They were also coming from all over the place, so we'd hear one off to our left. Then after that, there would be another one on our right, or it would sound like it was right behind us. It didn't make any sense, and it was even putting my dad on edge, who's the most laid-back guy you could ever meet. He mostly quit talking, and I would catch him looking into the trees. When we got to the cave, we followed the tiny creek up past some fallen logs and things to get to the mouth of it. The whole time we were there, we didn't see another person and had the place to ourselves. Then, after checking it out for 15 minutes or so, and I will say it was a pretty cool thing to see, we started making our way back down the creek. We couldn't have been more than 50 feet out of the cave when yet another strange thing happened. There was this light electrical hum that all four of us could hear and feel, and as we were walking back, there was like a charge in the air, and it made the hair on my arms and head stand up like static. It really freaked me out and made me want to get out of there as fast as we could. Before we left the immediate area around the cave though, my dad stopped us at this little wooden viewing deck that was probably only 6 or 8 feet long with a railing. I think it was there so people could see the cave from a good vantage point without having to walk up the creek. We were all standing around this thing when my dad scared us by shouting, "What is that?" Then what happened next was only seconds long, but I can see it in slow motion in my memory. At the very top of the cave in the trees, there was a group of metallic-looking balls lifting up from the ground. I know there were at least 5 of them and possibly more, but I wasn't thinking about counting. None of them were moving in any other direction, they just went straight up and stayed at about the same height as each other through the trees. The static and the hum were still around us and nobody made a sound except for my mom, who I remember freaking out. I can only guess what size these things were, but I'd say somewhere close to large beach balls, and the surface of them was reflecting the trees like a mirror. That's why I thought they were metallic. These were not Mylar balloons either, and I'm saying that because more than one person has mentioned those after hearing the story. Balloons filled with helium drift and move. These went perfectly straight and stayed together without a single shift all the way into the sky. There was a light layer of clouds that day, so when they got out of the trees, they looked white and it was impossible to follow them after that. My family went into a frenzy after this, as I'm sure anyone else would do. We went through many different emotions and had to keep asking each other if what happened was even real because it didn't seem possible. We also walked a lot faster on the way out than we had on the way in. Back at camp, it was the only thing we talked about for most of the rest of the trip, and I think I was the only one who was really scared by the experience. My brother thought it was the coolest thing in the world and kept saying they were alien drones. He was also sure that he had seen the first one at the beginning of the hike. My mom and dad were throwing out other theories too, from ghostly orbs to something Bigfoot related, since it's such a popular place for that. In reality though, we didn't know anything. My brother has wanted to go back ever since, but I have no desire to ever hike that trail again. The whole place had this aura that gave me the creeps, and I normally love being in the woods. I would like to know what we saw, but I honestly have no interest in finding out in person.